Welcome to the Common Weal Policy Podcast. I'm Jonathon, Shafi, the Campaigns Officer here at Common Weal, and joined for the first of our podcasts of 2021 with Dr. Craig Dalzell, who's the Head of Policy and Research at the think tank. Craig, Happy New Year, as much as it can be. Of course, that's very limited in scope given the situation that we all live in and that we all face. But how are you getting on so far into the new year?
Happy New Year to you, and Happy New Year to everyone who's listening. I hope you all had a good and safe Christmas. Our holiday here was pretty quiet. It was just me and my partner in the house on Christmas Day, although we did go round to my mum's and swap presents through the door, stayed outside and came home and unwrapped everything over Zoom. And then Christmas dinner consisted mostly of eating an ungodly amount of cheese. It was glorious.
Well, now that we've had the relaxation of the festive period, it's not taken long at all for us to be immediately confronted with, once again, a very difficult situation. I remember, and I've said this a few times, the podcast that we did way back in March of last year, the end of February, start of March, where we were discussing the start of the whole pandemic, and we were discussing how we would respond to it in terms of how best to have a testing system, how best to understand the development of the virus. And I suppose the one thing that you might say is that we do have at least something of a better understanding of the virus, though there is this new strain, and there may be multiple strains which develop over the next period of time. We're going to go into a few issues here, some of the most pressing matters around vaccines and around how we get through this. But I thought it would be useful, Craig, if you could give us your broad assessment of where you think we are now in the chronology of the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting looking back over the last year, looking back at those initial forays we did as an organisation into this topic and the amount that we've learned along the way, but also kind of the chronicle of almost missed opportunities throughout. We had that first wave. We had the very extreme lockdown that seemed to be very effective. It brought the rate of infection in Scotland down to a very, very low level. But then we opened up again, and despite warnings from multiple sources, not just ourselves, that we weren't doing enough of the testing and tracing and isolation of the cases that were still emerging through that lull, and the risk that would create a new outbreak, we ended up getting a new outbreak in October, November. We had to go into a second round of restrictions that were not quite as tight as that first March lockdown, yet they were still having an effect. Infection rates were starting to come down again, and then they have started to increase again. And a good chunk of this has been put down to this new variant that has emerged throughout the UK. It's now responsible for something like just over half of the new infections in Scotland. Because it seems to be much more transmissible, much more infectious than the older strains that were present in Scotland. It seems to be affecting the rate of infection in a very negative way. So we have ended up in this third period of restrictions, and we're back in a place that very much looks like the place we were in March and April and May.
Yeah, and obviously quite dispiriting, but I think the way you put it is it really chimes with my view as well, and I think a growing view that the way this has been handled, the stop-start when it came to lockdowns, as you've pointed out, the lack of infrastructure around the testing system, quite remarkable that the report which you and others were involved in when it came to Common Weal marked out very clearly, very quickly, how much it would cost and how we could implement a fully functional test and trace system. And we warned in that paper, and in the context around that paper, we said that one thing that we can't afford to do is to keep going in and out of lockdowns. Now, alongside that, I mean, we're not going to just look backwards, because there's a lot we've got to discuss looking forward. But having the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, allowing the virus to circulate, having the very short lengths of time between changes and restrictions, particularly from Boris Johnson, though Nicola Sturgeon and the Scottish Government haven't been too different policy-wise from Westminster. But one of the things that has been running throughout the whole of this crisis, and one of the things that has been discussed over the last number of days, is that regardless of the restrictions that the UK put on internally, that people could still get into the country, seemingly not have to have any real process to go through when they land at an airport, nothing like the kind of quarantining that we've seen in other parts of the world, New Zealand and so on. And it seems to me that this just undermines the credibility of the messages around lockdown, when at the same time you're letting almost anyone come in and out of the country, regardless of having any kind of process around making sure anyone's not bringing in the virus.
Yeah, I mean, that second wave back in October, November has been pinned on people leaving the country, entering the country over summer, whether that was people coming to the UK on holiday or people leaving the UK on holiday and coming back with the virus. So we know that has happened already, and that's on top of anything that you can say about this new variant, possibly having developed within Britain and circulated within Britain rather than coming from elsewhere, although we also have threats of other similarly high-risk variants, like one that seems to be circulating in South Africa. It is a big problem, this idea that whatever we do to control the rate of infection within Scotland, if we just keep reseeding outbreaks from people coming into the country, or thinking about our international responsibilities, if we allow this highly infectious strain to escape this island and transmit elsewhere, which it already has done, it is now circulating around several countries, then we're not making this problem easier for us. Quite the opposite. So the announcements in the last couple of days is that the UK finally, after 9 months of other countries putting in border restrictions, the UK is finally considering some kind of regime of allowing you to enter the UK if you have had a negative test before you get on the plane. The problem with this is it's completely undermined by the fact that they're already saying that British nationals and residents in the UK might be exempt from this criteria. So that's still the issue of someone, if they leave the UK and come back with the virus, they could just walk right through the airport. You also have an issue, and this was brought up when we lobbied the Scottish Government to try and increase border checks and testing, is that if you are in the very, very earliest stages of having the virus, then it might be harder for it to be detected just by a test. So you might have the test just before you get on the plane, and by the time you arrive here, you're now infectious. Or you might catch it from someone else who's on the plane who was exempt from being tested. So just that act of a negative test and you're fine might not be sufficient. We've been saying that we really should be looking at the countries that are doing this in a much more effective way. We've highlighted the case studies of New Zealand, of Australia, of South Korea, of Vietnam. And the thing they all have in common is that they have a system of what's known as managed isolation. So it's not just a case of you've tested negative, you can come into the country and it's fine, you can then just go wherever you like. You are then directed into a government-run hotel or similar facility, and you are held in quarantine, either until you test negative several times, or you spend up to 14 days in that managed isolation. And this is how you prevent the virus getting into your country from outside.
Exactly, very well put. I mean, I know people that have experience of these facilities, and okay, the food isn't particularly great. I'm sure they would far rather being able to quickly get off the plane and go and see their family and friends or whatever they're going to do. But I think that they understand that the benefits that you get from having this kind of system just so outweigh the costs, and those costs are huge. They are costs to not just the economy, but people's mental health, people's relationships, all kinds of things that have been discussed, that have been tied to the need to go into these lockdowns. Now, let's just move the conversation on a bit, though, because there is one clear difference now, this time round, than at the start of this whole thing, and that is that we do have a vaccine. In fact, there are multiple vaccines being manufactured, and we don't know how these will work in the long term. It may mean that on top of the two jabs that people have to get in order to be immune to the virus, that more may be needed in the years ahead. That's something we've got to look at. But this is a huge logistical exercise, isn't it? So we want to have now, if it's okay with you, Craig, and amongst this, quite a realistic conversation about the vaccine. We've been told so many times, this crisis will be resolved by this time. It doesn't happen, and therefore it's pushed back, and so the cycle goes. I think what people want is a sense of when realistically can we start to talk about things moving beyond the pandemic, the lockdown, and the vaccination programme and so on. If we could just start then by talking about the vaccine. Just give us your general thinking around this.
I mean, the fact that we have these vaccines, we have multiple vaccines so quickly, is a global success story. It is one of these consequences of, you might know the old economic adage that you can get a job done well, get it done quickly, or get it done cheap. Pick two. Well, this is an example of what happens when you say that you don't need to pick cheap. That you can do things well and you can do things quickly if you throw the resources at it. And we have done that, and we have ended up with multiple vaccines now that appear to be very effective. So yeah, there's a lot to praise in this, and a lot of hope to be gained. But the challenge now switches from one of development to one of distribution, and yeah, we do need to be realistic here. This is one that actually caused me a bit of a mental health hump when I realised what it actually meant in terms of that distribution. And it is one of maths here. If you have a sufficient number of supply and all the bottlenecks are smoothed out, there's still this idea that you can only vaccinate so many people at a time. The UK is looking to vaccinate to do, I think, something like 2 million vaccinations a week. It takes 2 jabs to fully vaccinate someone, so that's 1 million people protected every week, the equivalent of, well, there's 67 odd million people in the UK, so that is still looking at 67 odd weeks to get the vaccine fully rolled out. So really, realistically, we are still looking at about another year of this until everybody is vaccinated. Now, that's not to say that we have to wait for a year to see any results. The way they're putting this out is through really looking at the vulnerable groups first, the older people with underlying health problems, the people who are at a very real risk of dying as a result of COVID. And if we can vaccinate that group first, then we should bring down the number of deaths very quickly. We're also looking at vaccinating the key personnel first, which makes sense. That you need to vaccinate the people who are giving the vaccinations. You need to vaccinate the people who are providing treatment for the people who will still be falling sick. For folk like myself, I'm in my mid-30s, I'm relatively healthy, I've got no underlying health problems, I am way down the priority list. So I am not expecting to get my vaccination until the later part of this year. And that's a sobering thought, but it's one that I've accepted, because if I am the last person on the list, literally the last person on the list, then that means that everybody who needs it more than me has got it.
Let's get into some of this, right? Because I want to put some questions to you. Some of the things that I've been doing, some of the things that people have been talking about. First, this whole nature of this vaccine requiring 2 shots. Now, it seems to me that there has to be complete transparency about what's going on here when it comes to the reporting of the figures. So if I report that 1 million people have had the vaccine this week, we need to understand whether or not that 1 million people has had their first or their second shot. I think that's an important point to make, and I would like your view on it. And I would also like your view as well on any analysis you might have on the period of time between administering each shot, so that it complies with the manufacturer's advice. And linked to that, I wondered if you had any thoughts on whether or not that scenario, if it was to come awry, if there was too much of a distance between people getting their first and second shot, whether or not, as some people seem to be saying, that gives scope for the virus to mutate further and to potentially mutate in ways which become vaccine resistant. So, look, I've put quite a lot to you there, but I suppose the central point being, if you could give us your view of the distance between these shots, the importance of the 2 shots, and where does it go in terms of how the virus mutates?
Yeah, so this is all a reference to the UK's actual strategy at deploying the virus, the vaccine. the vaccines were tested in a very particular way. That you get your first shot, which either gives you a certain amount of protection, a fairly high but not total level of protection against the virus, or it might be a protection that if you don't get the second shot, it could fade very quickly. It depends on the virus, on the vaccine, which of those scenarios is true. So the second shot acts as a booster to your immunity, but also acts to give you a longer term immunity. So it is important to get both shots. When it comes to your time, don't miss that second appointment. Don't miss the first one either, but definitely don't miss that second one. Now, the UK has sparked a bit of controversy here, because it is saying that it wants to delay giving out the second shot so that it can give more people their first jab. Their rationale being that partial level of protection might act on the most vulnerable people, might act to reduce the number of deaths faster than giving a smaller group of people, more total protection. I understand that logic. I understand that narrative. I'm not qualified to really deeply analyse the maths and the statistics behind that. But it is something that does make me slightly nervous, because immediately, we've just started rolling this out, and we're already going against the manufacturer's recommendations and the way that these vaccines were tested. So there are reports in the media today of the World Health Organization saying that they do not have data on how the vaccine will react to this new deployment strategy. That's not to say that there is data that it won't work. To say that this strategy won't work is wrong. We simply don't know. We don't have the data. So it is a bit of a risk, and I hope it works. If it does pan out that this is a way of reducing deaths faster, it's maybe an acceptable risk. More worryingly, I'm getting reports from some of my friends who work in the NHS that key workers are seeing their second jags delayed to fit with this strategy. And these are people who are at the very highest risk of catching it. They're right at the front end. They're surrounded by sick people throughout their entire shift. If you can't protect the people who are treating people, or the people who are giving out these vaccines, if staff numbers start to fall because people are falling ill, which is already happening. NHS is seeing its staff members fall ill with COVID. One of my friends spent the break period there in ICU with COVID. Thankfully, he is recovering, and he got back home this week. So there's a lot of worry from the staff there, and I would really appeal to the Scottish Government to consider, fully vaccinating key workers. Even if this strategy of delaying the second jag for other people has continued, we really should be considering protecting the people who are protecting everybody else.
Yeah, I have to say I am very unconvinced, and as you pointed out, look, I'm not trained in any of this. I'm only reading what everyone else is reading and attempting to grapple with the expert analysis that you can find. And there are, of course, contrasting perspectives. This is a work in progress. But it does seem to me that this is already opening opportunities. I was reading recently about how the virus can and will mutate. It happens every time there is a virus. But the possibility of it becoming resistant to the vaccine if people are only partially immune is something that may well be something that we have to confront. And I was reading that if that did happen and it did become vaccine resistant, it wouldn't take a year for the new vaccine to arrive to confront that one. It would take something in the region of about 6 weeks or so. But that's still a delay. That's still having to put the logistics all back out again. And so when you add all this together, I don't think that we are going to experience any part of this year without the question of this section of the pandemic and the vaccine rollout and so on being with us. So I think we're really in for the long haul. I just want to just come towards the end here, but I wanted to ask you this because it's something I've been thinking about. I remember when they talked about the vaccine and they talked about how they were going to distribute the vaccine, that it would first of all go to the most vulnerable in our society. I thought to myself, well, that makes absolute sense. On the other hand, you'd have to say that possibly that those in care homes and those that are classed in the most vulnerable sections of our society may not be, in fact, the people who are most socially and active in terms of going and meeting lots of different people. They're also potentially not part of the working population, particularly those that live in care homes and so on. And so the ability for those individuals to actually spread the virus is limited. And I was reading some research and some debate going on about the process they've undertaken in Indonesia, where what they've said is that they're going to start with their working population, their people who are most active around meeting different people, to curtail the spread and therefore to in doing so at the same time protect the most vulnerable because the virus is less prevalent in general. And there were researchers and very expert and very qualified people who were looking at this, and they came to the conclusion that both the Indonesian and the UK strategy had some potential merit, and they were in fact happy that both were taking place so that they could then assess what was most effective in the future. And I just wondered, I found all that quite interesting, and I just wondered, Craig, if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, it is interesting, and I'm sure that we'll see other countries embarking on their own experiments and strategies. And yeah, scientists love data. We're going to get a lot of research papers coming out of the analysis of those different strategies. I mean, you might find that in some countries where the demographics skew somewhat younger, you might look at different approaches. I lean away from that kind of strategy on the basis that the strategy of preventing deaths is a very valid one. We can't write off old people and just consign them to succumbing to this. The counter argument is there is still the very real threat of long COVID, and we don't know what the long-term effects of the virus on younger people might be. We already know that there have been cases of younger people who have permanent damage to their lungs because of this. So maybe trying to prevent future long-term health problems is a consideration too. As I say, I think we have it right in the terms of the priority list here. Get the key workers and the infrastructure and the vulnerable people protected first, and then folk like myself can wait. It ultimately is a game of how fast can you get everybody, though. So that's really where we need to be. Just to pick up on your point on the risk of the virus mutating into a vaccine-resistant strain. I mean, the UK at the UK government's press conference yesterday, they mentioned this, and they talked about the risk being non-zero but very low, which is fine. But we are still dealing with an exponentially spreading problem. Very low instances can become national-scale emergencies within weeks, as we have seen with this new transmissible strain. So the very fact that this risk is non-zero should say that we need to double down, triple down, massively increase the things that we were already doing and should have been doing from the start, which is testing, tracing and isolation. So that if this new strain, a hypothetical vaccine-resistant strain does emerge, we shouldn't even know that it had emerged because people are being isolated and they're not spreading it. That's the solution to this.
Yeah, no, I thought that your comments there were really quite interesting, and also to me very well articulated, because these are difficult issues that we're grappling with. I think everyone accepts that, and I totally agree. I think that no one's saying that the vaccine resistant strains that might emerge are in that's going to happen or anything like it, but we have to be prepared for all eventualities, because the thing that's happening as well, that I think is going to become more and more of a question, is that the longer this goes on, the more damaging the economic consequences are going to be, and the social and all of the other things that are going to be impacted by this. They already have been so heavily and negatively impacted, and it's going to continue. And so here at Common Weal, we've done a huge amount of work, a lot of policy work, a lot of input from Craig and others, where we've looked at economic recovery, and we've looked about how we can do this in a way that rectifies a lot of the economic problems that we had even before the onset of the pandemic, a lot of the inequalities and a lot of the big environmental questions as well. So there's lots that we are going to be doing. I suppose, Craig, I just wanted you to, if you could, just give us a sort of last comment just to conclude today's discussion, just about that, just about looking ahead beyond the pandemic, beyond the vaccine and the virus, and looking at some of the big economic questions that we're going to have to face down, and maybe just a comment about where Common Weal is going, and where there's going to be a bit of hope for the future, and where we are going to be applying pressure and building campaigns when it comes to the economic recovery itself.
I mean, as we said at the start of this episode, right now we're sitting in a lockdown that looks very much like the lockdown we were in March, April and May. So when we were in that lockdown last year, Common Weal went into a very intensive period of research and development and came out with our Resilient Scotland plan, which started with a plan to come out of the tail end of that lockdown in a secure way, to support the economy and rebuild it, and then to start reconstructing the Scottish economy into something that can face the next big challenge, the climate emergency, over the next parliamentary session, and then over the following 20 years up to 2045. As we've said, where we're sitting right now, the only difference between now and then is, one, we have a vaccine, and two, it's 9 months later. So what I would say to folk is, we have the plan already. all we need to do is do it properly this time.
Absolutely. Craig, as ever, it's good to talk, regardless of the circumstances. We are very hopeful of moving through this year in the most positive way that we can. And one thing that we will make sure of, as we have done throughout this whole crisis, is to ensure that Common Weal is front and centre when it comes to putting forward solutions that will benefit the massive ordinary people in our society and across Scotland. And we do so through our reports, the work that we did on care homes, the work that we are doing on rent and on evictions. We're doing lots of work as well on how we can rebuild more generally from the pandemic. And of course, we've done lots of work and research when it comes to testing and costing the testing infrastructure and all the associated reports that go with that. So we've been exceptionally busy, and we will be, I think, even busier this year. We are going to be launching a very significant campaign which you will be able to get involved with, that will be impressing upon the politicians and the government the need for radical economic and social change as a result of this pandemic, and of course because of the 10 years of austerity that we experienced prior to it overlapping. So lots to be done. This is the first episode of the year. It's not necessarily the most upbeat, but I think we have been realistic, and there's always going to be hope when you've got organisations like Common Weal who are mobilising, organising and reporting and writing policy in the ways that we know we need to as we move forward into the year. So with that, thanks very much for tuning in. Stay safe, and we'll be back next week.